So last month I participated in one of the most famous 3D community challenges out there, and in this video I want to share and break down my workflow. The challenge itself is hosted by the famous Pwnisher channel on YouTube, and it's a reoccurring event that happens every couple of months. And after my last submission for one of the past challenges, where I managed to get into the top 100 results, I was quite motivated to join again this time and see how the result would turn out. So every artist provided with the same starting point, and your task is to develop an idea and make an awesome looking rendering and hopefully score as high as possible, of course. As a 𝐘𝐸𝐴 and VRay user, I'm a little bit of an exception in this challenge, as the majority is using Blender or Unreal, but after a little bit back and forth, I also managed to import the starting files into 𝐘𝐸𝐴 as well. So this would be the starting point that every artist is given, and you would pick one of the provided animations and develop your ideas around it. So I opted for a jumping animation and decided I want to make a character that is jumping off a building while being chased by zombies. So for the main character, I opted for this sci-fi looking robot, and as my time to work on this project was fairly limited, this and many other assets were downloaded or purchased so that I could focus on scene assembly, lighting and shading those. Luckily the model was already fully rigged, so transferring the animation from the startup file was easier than expected. For this I just moved my robot to the starting frame of the provided jumping animation and tried to match them as close as possible. My robot has an underlying body geometry and various armor parts which are placed on top, and I first skin wrapped all those armor parts to my body geometry and then connected the body geometry with the jumping animation bones, and just by using a default weighting it already worked quite well. So now I need to work on the zombies, which I also purchased online and just had to spend some time to make them all look consistent. They didn't come rigged, but that wasn't any issue as I used Mixamo for all of the animation. For this I could just export every zombie model and load it into Mixamo. Then I used a built-in auto rigging that works really good in most cases, and once this process is done I was ready to load any of the provided animations on my model. I then selected the animations I needed and downloaded the rigged and animated models. So back in 𝐘𝐸𝐴, since I didn't really want to deal with countless rig setups for all of my zombies, I just baked all of the animation into point caches so that I'm easily able to switch between them as needed. I could then assemble and time all the different animations easily until I reached something that worked well for me. So for the environment I found a really nice asset pack with highly detailed buildings, and of course it was not available for 𝐘𝐸𝐴 again, so I spent quite some time to import everything, rebuild all the materials and shaders and convert them to VRay materials. But once this process finally was done, it was definitely time well spent, as it overall saved me a huge amount of time, and just like this I had quite a nice assembly of various buildings that I could use in my scene. So while I placed a lot of lights by hand, I also built a shading setup that simplified this process quite a lot by just boosting the GI contribution of my emissive shaders so that it looks like they actually cast light onto my scene. So this helped me speed up the process quite a lot because I didn't have to place manual lights for all of the various neon signs, billboards and lampions. So then, during the scene assembly, all I had to do was to place my assets in a way that felt nice to me and looked good from camera perspective, and then I was ready to start setting up the lighting. So the first thing I did was to add some volumetric fog to the environment and see how the scene looked like with the building lights that I already set up, and then I added a few extra lights to the buildings where I felt it needed a bit more details. Then I added my environment lighting to establish a general light direction and overall brighten up the scene. I then added some additional lights that just affect the fog to add some color accents here and there. Let's check out a different frame. So here it is with just the initial building lights. Now I added some extra building lights. Now also the environment lights for our light direction. And lastly some additional lights that just define the fog. And of course we're missing the characters, so this is how they would look like with the existing lighting. And then I placed some additional lights in order to make the characters a bit more readable. And now I was basically ready for rendering. And this brings me to the sponsor of this video, which is Fox Render Farm, and they kindly supported me to render this project. And since I've used it oftentimes in the past, I can tell you their ease of use, pricing and customer support is really unmatched. Fox Render is also deeply integrated in many software packages, so in 𝐘𝐸𝐴, for example, you can submit your scene seamlessly by using the built-in plugin. And once it's checked your scene, you can easily submit and upload your scene, including all the assets, to their fast servers. So it's basically a one-click solution. Now you can just sit back and monitor the progress in the app and wait for its completion. And for reference, rendering this whole sequence cost me around $96 worth of render credits, and it would have taken me several days to complete on my own workstation, while it finished in less than 1 hour on Fox Render Farm. For the effects, I kept it relatively simple and decided to just build a dynamic rain setup, and I used Tyflow to generate a lot of rain particles, which will then emit some additional splash particles whenever they collide with something. I then rendered everything out in 2 separate passes, and since Fox Render Farm also supports Tyflow, this was fairly simple. Finally, I brought everything together in DaVinci Resolve. The project was set up using full ACES CG multi-channel EXR workflow, so all elements had to be assembled and composited together in Fusion for maximum control. I also tweaked the overall colors and tried to give everything a filmic grading. I also added some lens flares and additional effects which I got from stock footage, and this concludes this making of. So let's take a last look at the final result and see you in the next challenge or on my YouTube channel.